All right, I got 30 minutes before we record a bonus episode of The Bench. Today, basically, Blizzard announced an insane amount of information in regards to what's happening in 11.2 Ghosts of Koresh. And with all of that information that's coming out, I kind of wanted to talk about some of the most important things that I saw. Now, this is not all encompassing. Whenever I'm talking about the most important things that I saw, I'm talking about me as a player who enjoys a lot of Mythic Plus, who actually enjoys a lot of PvE content, and those are the kind of things that I'm going to be talking about by and large. A lot of it's going to be like game system stuff and those kind of things. If you enjoy looking at the mounts and stuff like that, I would highly encourage you to peruse Wowhead for those kind of things. But with that out of the way, again, I only got 30 minutes, so let's try to make this 30 minutes long. First and foremost, we have the full dungeon rotation, which are the 4 dungeons that we voted on, which were Dawnbreaker, Arakara, Operation Floodgate, and Priority of the Sacred Flame. Those are all returning as we're within dungeons. We have Echo Dome Aldani, which is a brand new dungeon. We don't really know too much about it beyond the fact that it is a 3-boss raid. It has a bunch of Devour mobs inside of it. Those are kind of the large-scale things that we do know about it. Then we have 3 returning dungeons, which are Halls of Atonement, Tazavesh Streets of Wonder, and Tazavesh Solia's Gambit. I think that this dungeon pool is S+ tier. Whenever you're like talking to people about some of their favorite dungeons of all time, Halls of Atonement, Tazavesh Streets, and Tazavesh Gambit, or they tend to be ranked quite highly, probably within most people's top 10s. Now, this doesn't mean that Blizzard is going to just like release them and they're going to be a top 10 level dungeon. I think if they released Gambit and the stop change is implemented on the mobs that cast Fish Stick in the first area, that dungeon becomes a lot more obnoxious. I do think that there are still more things that they're going to have to do. Ultimately, and I think Growl said this best on an episode of The Bench a few weeks ago, Blizzard ultimately can make a dungeon good or bad whenever it's returning. Just because it is a good dungeon that is returning doesn't mean that it will be well designed. And so there is still a little bit of a burden on Blizzard to continue to try to improve these dungeons with Halls of Atonement, Tazavesh Streets, and Tazavesh Gambit. But if you want my honest opinion, I think that I would kind of give a lot of leeway to Blizzard to make sure that the dungeons are improving, because Blizzard, I think, over the last couple of seasons has actually done a good job of improving Mythic Plus for the long run, whether it be some of the changes that they made to the systems, the removal of affixes. Whenever players were like, okay, dungeons are just frankly too hard, in season 2 they made dungeons just straight up across the board easier. I think that I'm excited about this season. I think that this season looks like absolute banger S+ tier dungeons. Not only that, but now Blizzard are improving dungeon checkpoints. So do not worry, everybody who's complained about dungeon checkpoints, your voices were finally heard, and Blizzard is going to be looking to revisit them. And Andrew D'Souza in a Wowhead interview says, we're going to be revisiting our philosophy on how long a run back is going to be taking and where dungeon checkpoints unlock. And we also want to visualize some of this in-game with what we're calling waystones. As you unlock checkpoints, you'll also have an icon on the map, and you'll have these stones to warp in and show you this is where I'm coming back if I release. The worst dungeon I've ever experienced is probably Halls of Infusion in terms of just terrible run back. I think that having the ability to be able to see where checkpoints are on the minimap is an advantage. It's a lot easier whenever you're frankly like learning the dungeons, or like whenever I'll be learning them on the PTR or whatever, to kind of tell what's happening. You can see it in chat, which is a new feature of 11.2. More often than not, I'm not looking at chat. So like having something on the minimap or having a waystone actually show up and show you where you're going to be releasing is nice. I would love for them to be more aggressive with checkpoints and overgive you checkpoints as opposed to undergiving you checkpoints, because we've been undergiven checkpoints for a very long time, and it feels really bad. And so I'm so thankful that they're actually taking a look at the dungeon waystones and the dungeon checkpoints. On top of that as well, Mythic Plus Leavers finally penalized with new deserter system coming in season 3. This is actually super funny. So Wowhead in an interview asked, are there any changes to address the frustrations of joining LFG groups in dealing with Leavers in season 3? Andrew D'Souza says, yes, I don't have all the details. We'll be sharing these as we go live with Ghost of Koresh throughout the PTR, but we're actually introducing a Keystone Deserter system. So the rough summary, and there will be more details as we progress through the PTR cycle, is that you'll need to put up an abandon vote, essentially, on your dungeon if things aren't working too well. And if the group agrees, you end up disbanding. There's no harm, no foul to your rating or anything like that. If you're leaving keys too often in the first iteration, though, we're not going to penalize you on an account level. You're just going to be marked as someone who leaves dungeons very often. So in Group Finder, you're going to see this player quits. That said, if you're on good behavior and you're finishing keystones and or using the abandoned system appropriately, you'll lose that mark as well. The first iteration, we're going to take a bunch of feedback, but we do view this as a problem And we also want to build a tool for players to agree that the key is over and punish players who suddenly vanish. I think that I've made a video talking on this channel talking about deserters in Mythic Plus. I do think that leavers are a problem. I think that people more often than not view people who make bad decisions to leave a key as a problem, because say the dungeon is timeable, but you've already had a wipe and somebody leaves. I know a lot of people who view that person as just the worst person ever. More often than not, and the people that this is going to negatively impact most of the time isn't going to be that person who makes bad decisions with their time and they leave dungeons whenever they don't know it's timeable. It's the most egregious of leavers, and you're going to be marked on your account. I think this is super funny that you're getting like the Scarlet Letter. I think that LFG player experiences are very important for the health of the game, just the ecosystem in terms of what we're seeing with World of Warcraft. I don't think that players that play with the 5-stack or players that play with 3 or 4 friends are going to kind of experience. I mean, they don't really experience this anyways, and so there's going to be basically nothing there. I think that equating it to like Dota low priority queue or League of Legends leavers queue, these are totally funny things. The biggest complaint that I had whenever I made that deserter video a couple years ago, I talked about, am I going to be held hostage in a dungeon? If I'm ever held hostage in any dungeon, I'm going to be alt F4ing out immediately. I think that most people can kind of resonate with that thought, where if you're going to be held hostage in a dungeon, that's just unacceptable. This doesn't feel like that, right? Like, you can still leave, but if you're leaving too much, like say you want to FF the dungeon and the dungeon's over, if you leave too much, you're going to get penalized. Now, a couple of things that I do wish that, and this is preemptive feedback, but Drynos and I kind of had a discussion about this. I wish that they would maybe look at dungeons that are marked as for completion versus dungeons that are marked as for under time. And if there could actually be a differentiation in the two of those as to how many votes that you actually need to get to quit out of the dungeon, or maybe potential penalties that are assessed whenever you're looking at the two differences in those types of dungeons, that would actually be, in my opinion, fairly good, because players have so different interests whenever they're actually doing dungeons. Some people are going to be in there for gear, some people are going to be in there for score, some people are going to be there for weekly vaults, some people are going to be in there to help boost to their friend. Everybody's got their different goal whenever they're doing a dungeon, and we just kind of all exist in the same ecosystem. And I think that maybe having additional ways to kind of list your dungeon and maybe having different parameters for the FF could be good. But I think that a lever system, it's a social solution for a social problem. And I think that this is probably the appropriate way of dealing with it. Also, Tazvesh hard mode returning as 8-boss mega dungeon in season 3. So how it's going to be happening, and we're going to be able to see this in a little bit, is the weird dead week that showed up before the raid ended up launching and before M Plus ends up going launching is gone. And with that being said, there is going to be new, and we're going to talk about this whenever we talk about the game system stuff and not the Mythic Plus stuff. There are going to be M0s available that week, and there are going to be delves that are available that week. Now, I think that the Mega Dungeon is technically classified as an M0, and it was listed, they're talking about it being a Mega Dungeon. They want it to be as hard as a +10, and it's going to be rewarded like a +10. I don't think I speculatively don't believe that it's going to be available week 1 whenever the other M0s and the delves are available, although it could be. But I think if it's going to be giving you hero track gear and rewarded like a 10, then I suspect that it's probably not, because then you're heavily incentivized to do this. I think that this is great. There's a lot of people, I've had this argument with somebody who comes to my chat occasionally, who wants difficult dungeon content that doesn't have a timer, and there is appetite from some players for this. Now, obviously not all players. I like timers. I think that Mythic Plus with timers is really sweet. That's why I love the replayability of it, and I think that the timer adds an additional layer of replayability to it that, if you lacked a timer, it just wouldn't. But at the same time, I think that there's worlds where this M0 hard mode Tazavesh can exist and actually feel fairly solid. On top of this as well, they talked about communication in the term information asymmetry, which means that you don't know what I know and I don't know what you know kind of mechanics. Hilbrand, the first boss of Gambit, had a mechanic that was like this, that was always solved by the weak aura. And Blizzard was saying that, I'll cite an example. With Tazvesh coming back, we're actually moving the Codebreaker boss Hilbrand. This is an example of the kind of mechanic that you're talking about that's moving to the hard mode version of the mechanic, where you're expected to be in a coordinated group, and an M+ experience with Pugs might not have something like that and will alter the mechanics. So basically, they're going to be looking to change. They're going to be able to maybe potentially show the code to everybody on that fight, whereas in the past, you needed a weak aura basically to be able to solve it. So I think that those are super sick. I'm so stoked about all the changes that they're making for Mythic Plus, whether it be the lever system, whether it be the new dungeon pool. Holy fuck, I'm so stoked about the new dungeon pool. They also aren't changing anything about resilient keys, although, you know, I have thoughts about resilient keys. I do wish they would look at the system to try to continue to improve it as opposed to leaving it as is. But if it's a question of leave it as is or delete it, I'm 100% of the time picking leave it as is because I think it's good in 95% of situations or 90% of situations, something like that. I'm so stoked for Mythic Plus next season. Now, moving on. Talk about some other stuff. So that was all for Mythic Plus. Now we have raid and game system stuff. So, first off, about game system stuff, hero talent tier sets coming in season 3. You're choosing between 2 options per spec, and you might start to ask, how does it even work? Basically, you're going to be getting your pieces of tier, and depending on what hero talent you have selected, then you are going to be getting a different tier bonus. And you can actually see all of the tier bonuses data mined and how they interact with very specific hero talents. I mean, for Balanced Druid, for example, for Elun's Chosen, the 2 pieces, Starfire damage increased by 25%. Gaining Astral Power with Starfire has a 50% chance to launch a Star Surge at a victim at 50% effectiveness. And on impact, Star Surge is launched by Starfire, split up into 3 additional targets at 80% effectiveness, and gain a stack of Gathering Moonlight. A lot of the tier set bonuses, I would recommend going and reading through some of these. For some of your favorite specializations, a lot of them are really, really cool. They're also doing some very specific specialization changes in terms of, there's, I think, the Brewmaster rework. There's another Shadow Priest rework. DK is getting some changes. I think I saw a rumor about a DK raid buff potentially as well. Those are the kind of things that we're looking for in the patch. I would recommend going and reading through those. I'm not going to really cover through the scope of those changes because I don't have super heavy expertise in all of the specializations, but I do think it's, for the specializations that I do play, the tier sets, I'm just going to say they look sweet. And they're a lot cooler than the tier sets that we had in 11.1. I personally felt like the 11.1 tier sets, particularly with like the jackpot and the winning streak and randomly proccing your tank bonus, they all felt kind of samey and they didn't really feel super engaging with what your specialization is. And I actually think that these are great. I think that something that's kind of been a little bit interesting this expansion is hero talent balance has been largely the same throughout the entire expansion, and Blizzard hasn't really been trying to touch hero talents too terribly much. They have some, but they haven't been trying to touch them too much. And if they could actually kind of use these tier set bonuses as a tuning knob to get you to be looking to use either a hero talent that hasn't been used for your specialization for the entirety of the expansion, or make that hero talent more digestible in different situations, I think that's sweet. Okay. Yeah, Season 3 champion gear from M0 is available immediately on launch. I talked about this a little bit earlier with the Hero Week kind of being axed. Basically, on the day of the patch, you'll be able to grab champion level gear from non-bountiful delves and M0 dungeons. Also, world bosses will be available, so you'll be able to jump in and have something to do right away. Banger. Okay, where are we going now? There's also, talk about some of the stuff with the raid. There's also an optional raid boss encounter in patch 11.2. I'm going to be honest, I don't know necessarily how I feel about this. Optional bosses, the last time I necessarily saw one was like Butcher and Highmaul and WoD. But I don't know if Blizzard necessarily intended it to be optional. It was just kind of... people didn't really recognize that you didn't need to kill it to actually be able to complete everything. They have changed Hall of Fame in the past to require killing all of the bosses to be able to obtain Hall of Fame. I'm really interested to see what, if anything, the Race to World First guilds, are they going to decide on killing that boss as part of being able to down the Race to World First and win the race? Or is it just whenever the final boss dies on Dimensius? Kind of an interesting question. I think you should be encouraged. I think you should be actually required to do every boss in the raid, I think, intuitively. Maybe my opinion on this will change, but I think just my gut reaction is it's a little bit weird that there's an optional boss. I'm excited to see what it looks like. Maybe my opinion will change on it after I end up playing it or after I end up testing it during raid testing. I would have liked a little bit of a larger raid as well. We do end up having 8 bosses, 7 if you count the Soul Hunters as an optional encounter. I would have loved to have seen like a 10 boss raid, like a banger 10 boss. But at the same time, if it's a banger 8 bosses or 10 bosses with 2 kind of meh bosses, I would rather take the banger 8. In addition to all this as well, we are going to start seeing 11.2 raid testing and dungeon testing starting relatively soon. So I believe it is next Tuesday we are going to start seeing Mythic Plus testing, and next Thursday is going to be raid testing. So yeah, I think this is gonna be sick. I'm super stoked to actually hop into the raid. I have started raiding Mythic again. Yeah, okay, so our War Within Season 3 dungeon testing begins on Tuesday, June 24th. Yeah. What are we getting? So week 1, we're only going to be able to test Echo Dome Aldani, so we're going to be able to see the brand new dungeon. Then week 2, it's going to be Priory, so all the voted dungeons. And then week 3, it's going to be Tazavesh hard mode plus the returners. Okay, so they're doing the same thing where they did in the past. So testing will be up probably as early as Tuesday of next week. So if you are looking to actually play and practice things on the PTR, or just kind of see what things look like, make sure you kind of go check those things out. Alternatively, I'm going to be releasing content on this YouTube channel as well if you want to live vicariously through me in that way. Another couple of game system stuff. We have Reshi Wraps, which is a new upgradable artifact cloak that we don't know a ton about. We have had it sounds very similar to the Heart of Azeroth with like the cloak. Those are the kind of things that I think of gut reaction wise whenever I hear artifact cloak. But I mean, let's see what I actually haven't had a chance to read this from Wowhead yet. So we'll go through this together and see what it is. I didn't know if there was like stat bonuses on it. I didn't know if there's procs on it. I mean, I assumed that there would be, but I guess I didn't know for certain. And so looking through this, what does it say? The wraps attuned to your specialization, granting you ethereal reconstitution. So basically whether or not you're damage dealer. Okay, so all damage dealers will probably have the same one. All tanks and all healers will probably have the same one. Your helpful abilities have a chance to gather dormant energy, heal an injured ally for, what is that? 600, 700,000. Overhealing from this effect grants an absorb shield for 20 seconds. Hold on. Overhealing from this effect grants an absorb shield for 20 seconds. You know, I love me some absorb shields. I love playing with Oracle Discs this season, unironically. So anything that allows my healer to be able to give me an absorb shield more frequently I will not complain about that. Your spells and abilities have a high chance to coalesce the energy around you, granting you a shield that reduces damage taken by 20% up to 1,000,000 total damage. Yeah, so this is the tank one. And then in addition to that, upon falling below 40% health, gain this effect at 100% effective. Oh, so like a pseudo cheat death style effect. I don't know how strong either of those are. I mean, I'm just reading numbers on Wowhead. I think that whenever I heard artifacts, I kind of expected a little bit more customization. Because whenever I think of artifact, I think of the artifact necklace and being able to make choices and have like active damaging abilities. But these seem more like procs, where the DPS ones, your harmful spells and abilities have a chance to focus light energies around you, dealing arcane damage split between your target and nearby enemies. Enemies below 35% HP take a 20% additional damage. Everybody's gonna have a pseudo. Everybody's gonna have like a pseudo execute. The ethereal energies can be further improved through a series of boots dropped from optional Soul Hunters encounter in Mana Forge Omega. So you can get boots that increase the power of the Reshi Wraps. Could be kind of good. Crafted by tailors, we've also found fibers fitting into the special socket, each offering some sort of secondary stat enhancement. So you can probably pick your secondary stats, is what it kind of sounds like. Very interesting with a brand new artifact. Yeah, then beyond that, there's enough cool stuff with the raid. We haven't actually heard too much about the raid itself. The last like really interesting thing was they kind of talked about the final boss Dimensius, and they said that he is as large as Stormwind, just in terms of size. So I don't really know what that's going to end up meaning for that encounter. Is it going to be a dragon riding encounter? Is it going to be an encounter kind of similar to Ansarek where maybe you click a portal? This is kind of what we've seen with Dimensius. Apparently his play area is just absolutely massive though. And so those are most of the very large, important topics that I saw from all of the stuff. You know, we have, there's other mounts. I think the mounts were showcased for the Dimensius mount and the Keystone Master and Keystone Legend mount. I mean, the Dimensius mount this thing is crazy. Yeah, but the Keystone Master and Keystone Legend mount, unfortunately, a little bit less cool. It looks like you're riding Rashidon. You want my opinion on it? But yeah, so I would recommend going and looking at the front page of Wowhead at a bunch of the 11.2 news if you were looking for that kind of stuff. And in the meantime, I'm going to be continuing to make more and more videos. I'm going to be start ramping up my content a little bit more as 11.2 picks up. And I hope to see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.